for Dayton.
We'll start with just instructions. Yeah, you'll have to start with an introduction.
Okay. Please say your name and where you are living.
Well, I'm Jim Courtney. I live in Minneapolis,
And what's your relationship to the Atons?
and I'm one of the original founding members of the club.
Uh, let's start with uh, basically I read the article that was in Lavender from the 25th anniversary in which you were interviewed,
Mhm.
and that sparked some questions. So I will start kind of with those questions. Where did you move to the Twin Cities from, and when did you move here, and why did you move here?
All right, I had lived in Chicago I had gone to school there, and then I lived there for about another 10 years. Uh, at the very end, I joined a club called Second City Motorcycle Club of Chicago, and that's where I got my um, initial education in leather clubs. And then we went on a run to Detroit, and I met a fellow, Larry Daniel, from Minneapolis, and was just bowled over by him, and he invited me up here. And next thing I knew, I moved up here. And this was in 1971. And then we formed the Atons in early, nobody knows exactly the actual date, but we certainly the spring of 1972, the Atons were created. And I think that the reason why they were created was because Larry had met certain leather people in New York City. Richard and Dee Dee are the names that come to mind. They were sort of a hierarchy of leather there. And prior to the Atons, there had been a club called the Atons. And one of our also founding members, Jim Booth, was a member of that club. And they had achieved a reputation on the East Coast. So when it came time, this club, I'm sorry, had not officially dissolved, but it was not in existence for quite a while. So when the name Atons came up, it was thought this would be a good name for us because it had collateral on the East Coast. And one of the things that Larry wanted to do mostly was to have a run here in the city. And I would say more than any other reason why the Atons were formed was to have this run. And so we formed the club, and we had our first run called Aqua One. And excuse me, having come up from Chicago, the entire Second City Club came up. And we had a few other people. We had about 30 people at our first run, which for that time of year or in that time, that was pretty good. And we considered ourselves successful with the run. And following year, Aqua 2 was to occur, but Chicago didn't come, and the run was canceled actually before it ever occurred. Okay, well,
We're talking
uh,
about Aqua One.
Aqua One, uh, it was an in-city run. It was our first. We put everyone up in members' homes. We didn't have hotels or anything like that. The first night, though, Friday night, one of our members at the time had a farm over just across into Wisconsin, and he had a barn, and so we all slept in the barn and other things as well. So, I mean, it was a real turn on for a lot of the members, I'm sure, or the guests. The next night, we moved everybody, or the next day, we moved everybody to the Twin Cities, and we had a banquet downtown in a restaurant that was in a triangle building. I cannot remember the name of it, but it was not the 90s, though that was there at the time. Uh, and the next day we had a farewell brunch. And that basically was the run.
Okay.
But, you know, if you going to runs myself at the time, that's all other cities were doing primarily.
Can you go back to talking about the banquet? Since it's
Well, I mean, it basically was going into a restaurant and sitting down, sort of like what we might do today at the German restaurant a couple of days ago. It wasn't anything really formal. There were no presentations or anything like that, no.
And then you're saying after that, the next day,
Well, the next day would have been Sunday, and of course that's the day that you give the farewell brunch, and that was the end of that.
okay. Let me go
But
back.
it was considered quite successful.
Okay, let's see. Let's go back a little bit. You got into leather in Chicago.
Well, of course, I had always had a certain there was a mystique about leather that, you know, I was always on the sidelines somewhere, and uh, leather always appealed to me. The way I got into Second City was they were always in Chicago was known for its Gold Coasts, which had various locations. And at one point in time, they didn't have a location, and they chose a bar that was only a block away from where I lived. And I went in there, and I sort of struck up a friendship with the bartender, who was a member, and he invited me for New Year's Eve to come to their clubhouse. And I said, great, scared shitless, quite frankly, but I wanted to go. So I said, well, I have all this. I have a big music collection. So I brought all my music down there. And they had a little office, and that's where the phonograph was. And I very conveniently put myself in that office because I didn't know what was going on in the rest of the place. And I played this music. And they kept coming in and feeding me drinks all night long, you know. Another drink, Jeff. So finally, I got out and I walked outside, and I couldn't believe it. Here were all these leather guys doing the polka. They had asked me if I had the beer barrel polka, and I did have it. And I played it, and I walked out there. I couldn't believe it. All these guys in full leather, you know, doing the polka. And I don't know, that just made me feel, God, I just want to be part of this. And at the end of the evening, they asked me if I would be interested in pledging their club. And, you know, I never pledged the Atons because I was an original member, but I did pledge their club. And it was a 3-month thing. I think it's still that in the Atons. And again, that's picking up the bylaws. And for the first time in my life, and I was about 30 years old now, 29, 30, I felt like I was on the inside looking out instead of the outside looking in. That's what leather clubs did for me. So when I moved up here, there was no leather club. In fact, I was told, oh, you don't wear your leather in town. You go out of town. Nobody seemed to want to have their friends know that they were interested in that sort of thing. And it was a real sort of a come down for me. But Larry also wanted to have a leather club here. So, and I would give him more credit than myself for getting that going. And as I say, in the spring, we created the Atons. I joined the club at a very interesting point because there were two groups within the club, and they were sort of at loggerheads with each other. But both of them were very, very nice to me. I love both of them. And we were going to have a run, and it's called the Wild Run. And when you have a run, and I learned this over and over again with the Atons, you know, it's a very stressful period of time, all that building up to it and everything. And if you have problems in the club, they're going to come out simply because of all that stress. You know, other times you can sort of keep everything under the cover. Well, there was a big blow up a few months prior to the run, and there was a split. And some of the people who I liked very much left the club. And I didn't know what to do. I was already at this point a regular member. And I decided I would stick with the club that was going to keep the clubhouse and the treasury. I guess I'm just a very commonplace person there. I didn't dislike what was going on, and so I felt no reason to bolt. And well, I wound up becoming an officer of the club. I doubt if I was a member for more than 6 months at that point. And it got sort of nasty. The new club and us. I mean, there was a lot of, innuendos and rumors, people saying this and the other thing, and they were trying to do everything possible to ruin the run, which was held over in Saugatuck, Michigan. And it turned out to be very successful. And it was actually after that run that the officers of the club decided to go to the Detroit run, where I met Larry. And I'd like to say a little story about that flight. We went first class. Now, back in those days, first class was maybe $15 more than regular. And we were up there in first class. And one of the other officers, who you may or may not have heard of, Tony Philbin, who later went on to find the Hellfires Club. He's with us. And you know how the plane gets off the ground and the stewardess says, after we reach cruising altitude, we'll be serving cocktails. Well, she got into this speech. And she's saying, after we reach cruising altitude, we'll be serving cock. And it seemed like there was this pause that went on forever before tails came out. Because she had looked at us. I mean, we were wearing leather and everything on this plane, up there in first class. Well, Tony Philbin turned around and said, well, I always knew you gave more up here in first class, but I didn't know you went that far. I'll always remember Tony for that line. So we went to the Detroit run, which, now from what they did, this was 1971, their big event was to take us on a paddle wheel sort of like the Paddleford here, down to an amusement park, which is no longer in existence. And it was on that boat. I had seen Larry the night before, and he just looked so awesome to me, I just didn't have the nerve to say a word to him. And then the next day, we were on this boat going down, and everybody had sort of left the inside area. There was a bar there. And I saw Larry go over to the bar. And I thought, okay, I'm going to walk over there and order a drink with him. And I started saying hello. And the next thing I know, we were inseparable. And we went home that night. It was the banquet and everything. I went to where he was staying. And Larry came on. I'm being very truthful here, by the way. Larry came on like gangbusters. I mean, he was trying to punch me, everything. We were laying in bed. And I had never experienced anything like this before in my life. And I just shot out of the bed. I said, I can't do this. And, here was this guy that I wanted to do everything for. I wanted to, but I knew I was just screwing everything up now. And he turned around and he said to me, well, just come back to bed. So I did. Well, somewhere along the line, an arm went over and all of this kind of stuff. The next morning, we took a shower together. Taken very few showers with other guys, but I took one with him. He told me later on that if I had gone along with what he was dishing out, it would have been a one-night stand. But because I didn't, we just became inseparable. Well, then we had to go to the farewell brunch, and now it's Sunday morning, and we went. It was held at somebody's home, and on the way out, because the brunch was going to be held in a park across the street, we had to go down this elevator, and the elevator got stuck, and it was a crowded elevator, and I was standing right by the door. They had to call the fire department. And on the other side of this door that was in front of me, there were firemen with axes. And, I'm thinking, this axe is going to come right into me. Well, they finally got it open. We went to the park. And, both Larry and I knew. I mean, we had just met, and now he's going to Minneapolis. I'm going back to Chicago. So we wanted to get away from everybody. And we went into the bush. There was a lot of bushes there. Probably people thought we were having sex back there. I don't know. Anyway, we were crying. Both of us. Just crying. Because we're going to have to part now. We just met, and we're going to have to part. And the following week was my birthday, and he said, come on up to Minneapolis the following weekend. And, you get this feeling, oh, this is all great, but it'll never happen, type of thing. And I had to go all the way home. And as I was going home, I put the key in the door. I heard the phone ringing. And it was Larry. And we were on the phone for over an hour. And we both had Watts lines at our works. So we called each other every day. And for the next 10 weeks, he flew down to be with me. And meanwhile, I was getting to 10 years at IBM, which meant I had vested interest in my retirement. So I thought I'll wait till that period, and I moved up here. Well, unfortunately, once we got together, it sort of went downhill. We stayed together for almost another year. In fact, we even went back to that same run in Detroit the following year just to celebrate our first anniversary, but it was over. I ultimately moved in with Charles Lamar, who was another member of the Atons, and well, that was the end of it. Larry was the first president of the club, and in fact, he was president for the first 2 years. That's where the idea of having only a two-term president came about, because Larry had done that for 2 years. He ultimately moved to Houston, unfortunately contracted AIDS, and he died in the early 90s. Okay, well, Aqua came up because of the Aquatennial. It was held the first weekend in August. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Aqua 2 never occurred. So the club didn't have a run for a number of years. And when it finally did, and you're going to ask me probably what year, and 75, 76. Actually, it wasn't just an Aton run. There was another club that had formed in the city called the Norsemen. And I may not be correct on this, but I know no one in the club that I'm aware of found this site. So I'm assuming it was a member of the Norsemen. And it was a Methodist youth camp out in Long Lake, Minnesota. And they were willing to keep, there was a fellow named Harley with his wife and his 2 daughters, and they were willing to have us come out. So we got together with the Norsemen and we decided to have a run, and that's where the term gopher came up. And it was very successful, and we had another run with them the following year. The story that I always remember personally from Gopher 1 was I had never been in a canoe before, and Long Lake is a long lake. And Saturday afternoon came along, and I had some free time, and I decided, I'm going to take this canoe out. And I'm going along, doing everything's just fine. And then all of a sudden I hear another canoe behind me. And they start singing, "When I'm calling you," the Indian love call. So I decided to answer that and say, I will answer true. Well, I learned that you don't turn around in a canoe. I learned very fast. I was in the lake. And it was the first time in my life, probably the only time in my life, I had to swim for my life. With boots on. I mean, can you imagine? I went into this canoe with boots on and everything, and I had to swim to shore. Well, everybody made a big thing about this, all through the rest of the run. Oh, and the group that were in that other canoe were all from Milwaukee, the Silver Star. And so we decided at Gopher 2, we had shows, by the way, at these runs, because the Norsemen liked shows. Well, half the Atons did, half the Atons didn't. But I was in that show, and I was in the second show. So we decided on that second show we would play up on this theme of the Indian love call, and I rented a Mountie uniform. And we got the original recording by Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald of singing the Indian love call. And Jeanette came in at about, 250 pounds from the Norsemen. And we did this number, and it went over so well, we had to do it again. And then as a finale, I came out and I did Stout-Hearted Men. Give me some men who are stout-hearted men, and I'll give you 5,000 more or whatever. And that was the final show. And I would have to say personally, for all the years I've been in Aton, that was my moment of glory. I really enjoyed that so much, and I lived off of that for years. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anybody around who ever was at that run now, but that was go for two. The Norsemen then went out of existence, but at that point in time, the Black Guard had come into existence. The Black Guard came into existence about 5 years after the Atons. So they said, why don't we do a run with you? So we did at least 2 runs with the Black Guard, and the shows continued. Then we found out that we were told by Harley that somebody had told the Methodist youth camp the fact that we had been out there every year. And they told him, no, 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 no. Suddenly we didn't have a run. The following year, he decided he and his family were going to leave, so he just didn't care. And he said, if you want to come back for this one last time, you can have your run. So we did. But we didn't have the Black Guard this time. And that's where the Atons having their own run started. That's where Atons having their runs every other year started. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Are we doing okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The Atons Biker Club that preceded the current Atons, how long were they in existence, and where did their name come from?
I don't, excuse me, I don't know how long they were in existence. This is a piece of information that you would have to go to Jim Booth to find out, because he was a member.
Okay.
As far as the Atons, all the other clubs at that time were using Greco-Roman names. And whoever, or that group of people, decided they wanted to be different. They came up with the Atons.
Okay. Okay, we'll ask Jim more about that. Let's see, what other events did the Atons do aside from the runs? What other events did you put on? What other activities did you do?
Well, at the time, because we lifted the bylaws from the Second City, we had 2 banquets a year, because our elections only, the January elections, only took care of 3 officers. The treasurer came in the fall. The point there was that you never had a completely new administration. There was always something left over, someone left over from the previous. And through most of the 70s, this continued. We had, I must say, I was always very impressed with our banquets. We would go into private dining rooms, and we had people in the club who would decorate for, the tables around. I must say the Atons had a great deal of style. They still do. But it started very early. And different people have been responsible for it over the years. At one point in time, though, the club's membership dwindled down to the point where it was felt that having this 2 banquet thing just wasn't economical. And they would, we decided to move everything together. Other than that, the other big tradition in the club was Toys for Tots at Christmas. And that started as a bunch of Atons getting parts of a bicycle and trying to put it together to give to a child. Well, after they got somebody else to completely redo the thing correctly, that started Toys for Tots. Originally, it was held in the homes of members, and we would invite people. We would put up a tree. We would give a tree to the hosting member. We would ask the guests to bring an ornament for the tree, and we would feed them. And if they would bring a toy. It got to about 70 to 80 people, and it was getting to be impossible to cook for all of these people. The tree was getting nicely decorated. So that's when we decided to go down to the 90s. And for many years after that, we had Toys for Tots there. Then the feeding the poor in the community became a thing. And we decided to add that to the Toys for Tots. But Toys for Tots was such a tradition for the community that even though we basically went over the food, people kept bringing toys, and we just kept accepting them. The story I like to relate on that, the Toys for Tots, was we did them at the 90s, and initially we gave them to the Marines because they had a Toys for Tots program, and we would simply give it to them. And the story I've always heard is about the Marine who had to come into the 90s to pick up these toys, and I guess he was very, very uncomfortable. So, anyway, then of course AIDS came along and we got into that. But we stuck with the food, and I think even today we still do food. You can either bring food or money. Other than that, we started doing fundraisers at bars. The Brass Rail was our first home, actually. They were very, very nice to us. Then Vern Melke, who was a member of the club at the time, got a job as a bartender over at the 90s. And so it followed that we went over there.
Talk about, in this 25-year thing, you mentioned something about... Yeah.
Sorry. Your vest on, it's sticking up a little bit.
Okay. Now,
There you go.
yeah,
Good.
yes,
Thank you.
okay. Talk about when the Atons started Leather's desire for being separate. I think in here you used the words that the Leather community here was not ready to march in any parades. Why were they kind of keeping themselves separate? What was that about?
Well,
Why was it you don't wear your leather here, you wear it when you go out?
well, the idea of Leathermen in Minneapolis when I first moved here was, these are guys who eat off of paper plates, and they just, they have no class, they have no style, they have no nothing, And the leather community, of course, was into all of that, and they looked at us as, not having any of that. And so I guess there was a reluctance to come out in leather. But forming the club changed all of that in terms of us going out. You started seeing. We, even before we went to the Brass Rail, we would go to the back of the 90s, and that was sort of an informal leather area on the weekends. So.
When did that change? When did you see that change? I mean, with the formation of the Atons, that was when leather started to be more visible?
When they started going out on Saturday nights, these weren't keggers or anything like that. It was just you went out as a club and showed your colors, maybe.
how have the Atons fit into kind of the nationwide leather leather community over the years?
Well, we've always courted the support of neighboring cities. Originally, it was Chicago. Ultimately, then it became Milwaukee. Milwaukee was a very good club, a city for us in terms of attendance at our runs, and we would go to theirs. Ultimately, Des Moines. We joined the Mid America Conference, and we hosted it actually at least twice that I can remember.
Uh, Talk about the Atons and the women's leather community.
Well, of course, the Atons have always been an all-male club. It's not particularly, I don't think it's particularly written into the Constitution of the club or the bylaws. Uh, again, I'm only going to speak for myself, but I remember one year we had to make the decision to allow women to come to our run, and it caused a big furor with people in Chicago. It's probably at that point where Chicago no longer becomes our main draw for people at our run. They they apparently had very, very strong feelings about this. This should be an all male situation. we we allowed women, and we've always allowed women ever since. My personal feelings on this, as far as the club is concerned, I joined this club to be with men, but that meant you have a responsibility to support women's clubs, and I've always done that. I'm a member of Heartless's. Remember Heartless?
Yeah.
Her club. They made me an associate member one year. Uh, and the Knights of Leather. Uh, Always been strong supporters of them. They, in return, have done the same for us. But today, the world has changed quite a bit, and younger people today, I know we have newer clubs in the club, in the city that allow women and men, and they reflect that. You know, I'm a retired Aton now. I don't know which way the club wants to go on this anymore.
Okay. Uh, Talk about GDIs, their relationship to the Atons over the years.
Well, our first theme run was Egyptian. Uh, and when there was a fellow named Jim Shalgren, and he was going to be our authority because he knew so much about Egypt for this run. And I was the run committee chairman, as I usually was, and I went up to him and I said, we are expecting a lot from you, and we're going to be basing a lot of what we do on you and what you advise us to do. And I would feel much more comfortable if you were a member of the club. And he joined the Atons. As far as GDIs are concerned, I don't think we would have the success we have if it wasn't for them. They come to our runs. They come to our events. They help the Treasury. And hopefully, they're the source of your next new member.
Let's see. Talk about the Eros party and the Halloween party. When did they start?
Well, they started very low key. It was the Halloween party. This simply was a cocktail party held in members' homes. Joe Miller's home, I seem to remember the most. One of our members is a member of, well, he's a mortician, and he gave us a coffin, and I remember being a bartender and serving drinks out of a coffin, you know. Ultimately, though, that got into more of a sex-oriented party after a few years. And that went on up until just recently, and it's been very hard to find a site for that. Eros simply was an outgrowth of that, to have something in the springtime.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Over in the last 40 years, lots of clubs have come and gone. Why do you think the Atons are still here?
Well, I'd like to think there's brotherhood in the club. It hasn't always been there in terms of all the members. The club has certainly had problems over the years. We had a big schism in the early 80s when certain members who wanted us to be more sequestered, less outgoing into the community, left the club and formed the MSM. And they came up with they introduced themselves at one of our runs to the leather community. And they had a very sharp uniform, sharper than the one that the Atons had at the time. And I remember thinking that they were just going to use our run and just walk all over us, because they looked so sharp and everything. Well, that was Friday night. Late Friday night, two of their members got into a brawl in front of everybody. And you don't do that at a run. We never heard from the MSM after that. We've had other problems in the club over the years, and there have been glory years. There have also been years of a lot of stress, and I hope that these years are behind the club. Why did the club actually continue? I guess certain people left. And the remaining club got together. I think the club has, at certain times, we had financial problems. But the remaining members have always sort of come together and risen above whatever the problem was.
Okay, what has kept you connected and involved with the Atons?
Well,
You still are.
before I retired about, 8 or 9 years ago, since 1971, the Atons, no, I'm sorry, 72, the Atons were my baby. It was Larry, it came out of our relationship. Our relationship didn't last, but the Atons did. And he left the city and all, and I stuck with it. And there were times when we thought the club was going to fold, and I worked and worked and worked, and to keep the club going, and it did. And I spent 20 some odd years of my life. So I'll never fully be away from the Atons, At this stage of my life, I do it more out of the nostalgia and the sociability of it. And I like seeing the members over here at my home once a year at Christmas time. And I go to various functions. But I'll always be an Aton.
what do you see in the club's future, or what do you hope is in the club's future?
Well, I hope the club will continue to be a moving force in the city. I know there are other clubs in town. There are other disciplines. Uh, but I hope that there'll always be that group of people who want to join a club such as the Atons. I think it's good for the city. I think it's good for the community.
Talk about some of the contributions that the Atons have made to the community over the years, or that individual members of the Atons have made.
Well,
What prompted that question is this picture of George Moore. It says here, he organized the first safe sex seminar for the leather community in 1985.
yes, he did. George Moore was one of the early members of the club. He was a black man. He was a male nurse. He worked down at the Red Door. This was all before AIDS. And continued through that period too. And he was also our president for 1 year. And as far as the interracial aspect, I would have to imagine that the Atons had a black president maybe before anybody else did, or certainly anybody in the Midwest. When AIDS came along, and because of his concern through the Red Door, we had a seminar at the 90s for AIDS prevention. And it was well attended. I think we had about 30 people in it. The Atons have been involved in, marching in the parade. We've done booths at the park.
Talk about the Atons in relation to contests and titles. I mean, did you sponsor people early on?
Well, there used to be a contest here in the city. The Blackguard and Heartless's group, I think, and the Knights, we'd all get together and have meetings to create a Mr. Minnesota or Minneapolis, I forget what it was. And this went on for a couple of years. I don't think we actually sponsored anybody. We simply created this event, and it went on for a weekend. It was sort of patterned after the Chicago contest.
Okay. How did AIDS affect the Atons?
Living up here in Minnesota, we were somewhat sequestered from that for a number of years. We lived up here, and we heard about all these things that were going on in Chicago, not to mention San Francisco and every place else. And people that we knew were dying down there. AIDS came along personally within the club. There was a member, an ex-member, he restored pianos and organs, and we heard that he was at the VA hospital, and he had AIDS. And I remember going there. This is my first experience. He was in a room that was very dark, by himself, off at the end of nowhere in that hospital. And I saw the emaciated body of somebody that I knew very well. And then, of course, he died. He could hardly talk when we were there. The next was a little different. Greg Gust. Greg Gust was a funeral director down in Dodge Center. And his illness was hush-hush. I didn't even know about it. And the reason for this was he knew he was dying, and he wanted to sell his funeral parlor. And it was this was during the period of all of this hysteria and prejudice and everything going on. And one day, Clark Buffkin, who was a member of the club at that time, and I went to see him. And I guess Clark was so shook up, he let it slip to me that he had AIDS. Up until then, we thought he just had cancer. It's bad enough. And then once he realized it, he said, "Jim, please don't say anything." And I guess he proved how upset he was, because as he was driving out of his parking space, a car was coming. He went right into it. I mean, his mind was someplace else. Greg knew he was dying, and he knew, obviously, because of his profession, how things are done. And he knew that on Tuesdays, the choir at his church always practiced. So that was the day he had his wake scheduled for. And the Atons were asked to come in. We were not the pallbearers. We were this honorary guard, and we were in our dress uniforms. And he left us, I think, $5,000, which we created the Greg Gust Fund. And that was to help people go to runs. I mean, it wasn't, for having a good time or anything. We were trying to, he knew it was important that the club needed to get its members out of the city. Well, unfortunately, it didn't stop with Greg. And when we had our first run, the Egyptian run, the club still has the mural, the Egyptian mural, which was made in my basement. And everyone, it was Tony Mayo, Jim Newman, and terrible. Maybe I'll remember his name later. I don't know. The three of them. Oh, and Jim Shulgren, who made it. They're all gone now. We had the Egyptian run, we had the Roman run, and we had the medieval run. And then they all died. We also we've never really had big theme runs like that since. That's what AIDS did to the Atons.
Okay. What's the most memorable thing that happened to you, small event or large event, from your time with the Atons?
Well, as I already mentioned, the Indian Love Call was certainly one of them. The other one, when the club was having its, I think it was the 25th anniversary, we had the Roman run. And because I was president, they asked me to be president because I was original member. So I was president that year. And being president, I got to be Caesar at the Roman banquet. And that was an interesting, I got to wear purple. Now, of course, when I first thought, I'm going to be wearing a nice white toga and everything. And they said, "Oh, no, you're Caesar. You have to wear purple." I thought, "Oh, thank you very much." And they made a gilded olive leaves for my hair, and it was just a lot of fun. Jim Shalgren, who I mentioned earlier, was brought in, wrapped in a rug, and thrown at me. And then they were the black guard was seated to my left, and they were causing a lot of disturbance, and they were going to be killed or something. And I simply got up and said, "Caesar is in a good mood tonight." Well, they all raved at that. So I would say that was probably my other big moment. Yeah. Oh, I have to say something else. Yes, the Egyptian run. It rained on Friday when we would have had the opening ceremony, and we had rehearsed this thing, and it was a big production, and we couldn't do it because of the rain. The next day it rained again, and we had dinner, and it stopped raining, and someone in the club thought, let's try it. So we did it. And it was all arranged around there was, I don't know, from what I hear, there's no more water in the pond anymore, but there was water then. And we had torches all around it. And we were playing Philip Glass's music to it. And we had somebody in a canoe go across to this big ankh that we had put at the, and we were bringing this light to it. And we were all in Egyptian get-ups with spears. No, with torches, I guess. Yeah. Well, the audience was at the other end of the pond. And, I mean, these are leather guys, You don't expect them to be the most reverent sort of people, when all this is going on. And they didn't say a word. They were just awed by what we did. And that was a magical moment. It really was. Yeah.
Was this at New Ulm?
Yes,
Okay.
in New Ulm.
Okay. That exhausts my questions.
Can you say one thing to the future members of the club, people who aren't here yet, or maybe something to actually kind of in spirit of especially recent events with a lot of young gay teens and having issues with bullying in schools and such? What would you say to young Leathermen and women out there?
Well, again, I came into a world from the outside. And I would imagine that they must feel somewhat outside of where they want to be. And they have the advantage, at least today, of having existing organizations to go to. And I don't know if a club like the Atons is for everybody, but certainly for those who are interested in what the Atons do, I would certainly suggest they look into it. Because if you find it's where you want to be, it is so nice to be on the inside. And you also have a feeling that you're with a group of people who are affecting where the gay life in the city is going.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. So let me take some. It's kind of.
Would it be easier for him to talk about something while we did it?
Yeah.
Ask me a question.
Okay. on in the community at large at the time the Atons were formed? You know, what was the general GLBT community like at that point?
Well, I mean, you went to the 90s, you know, there wasn't much else going on
Did you
there.
ever go to the old Suttons?
That's right, there was a sentence. You know. I think I was there maybe 2 or 3 times.
Okay. See, that
Yeah.
was my first bar, was the old Suttons.
Well, sure.
Then I found the 90s after that.
Uh,
Oh, I'm gonna be insulting. When I came out, I mean, I was 19 when I came out, and when I came out,
I was 14.
okay, when I came out, Suttons was where the younger people went, and I was told the 90s was where the older people went. But I eventually checked it out anyway.
No, they went to the Brass Rail. That was the Elephant's Barrow Ground.
The what?
That was the Elephant's Barrow Ground. The Brass Rail.
Oh, okay.
Could you just kind of, can you mimic me a little bit? Just kind of, very nice in your hands and, you know, sigh a little bit, right? Yeah. You know. Yeah.
Are you getting what you need? Yeah, okay.
Let's grab your crotch once. Exactly. Thank you. All right.
That's what he wanted.
It'll be in the title sequence.
Every time I cough, you can see my hand down here.
Just making sure you don't hernia. Oh,
So did you get me walking through?
of course I got you walking through. Oh dear.
I was supposed to be alone, talking to this nebulous.
Yeah. I'm just going to get a couple side shots. Andrew?
So we'll just keep him distracted all over the place, that way he won't know what's going on.
God.
You guys keep talking a little bit.
Okay.
So one thing you never asked him about was whitewater and getting the, because for some reason that didn't appear in the article either.
Yeah, you mean when it flooded out?
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that. Maybe after Andrew's got his things, his side shots, you can put it back and I can ask you about the year it flooded
Sure.
out.
Sure.
And then the other thing is when you found the current site, that's quite an adventure. You went down there in the wintertime and had to trudge through the snow.
Oh yes, yes. The oh God.
Okay, so
Well, I mean that's a good
Well, I
story.
know it. It's history. It's history.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good story as well.
Yeah.
year the run got flooded, finding current.
That was during the period when we really didn't have a run site. When we went down to Whitewater State Park
Okay,
outside of Rochester.
yeah,
But I'm not going to go through all this until he
right.
gets
Oh
out.
shit, I don't have a card. Why isn't it on tape? There it is. What is tape? Then it goes to file has no images.
Let's see, I can't ask you any questions because we've talked about them all.
We'll talk about something different.
Okay.
Where are you going for Christmas? I'll ask you a question.
I don't know yet.
Huh?
We're gonna be around here because I can't get away from work.
Okay.
So we'll probably be around here.
We just got back from New England.
Oh, how was that?
Well, we went to the wedding, you know.
Oh, Bill and Girl.
Bill and Growlers,
Yeah.
yes. And then we stayed there for a couple of days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are the colors pretty much done, or did you get in some?
No, actually, they hadn't started. Well, I mean, they started, and we drove away from the coast to see as much as we could.
Okay.
But no, I would imagine 2 weeks later would have been peak,
Okay.
you know. So, yeah.
But the wedding was nice.
Oh, it was wonderful. Touching, too, you know. It was on a beach.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I think, Sam, you cleaned up the beach for them? Or you helped
No,
clean?
David, no, I didn't help. David.
Well, a couple of 2 nights earlier, we had been at the beach for the meet and greet, and the flies were incredible. And we blamed the seaweed that was on the beach for attracting these.
Okay.
So I guess they cleaned all that up, huh, for them. Well, I don't know. Bill made a statement about that. I don't know.
Well, no,
At the dinner.
David actually went there and cleaned up some of the seaweed.
Okay.
So, and I don't.
But we didn't have the problem the night of the wedding, that's for sure.
And how long have they been together?
20 years.
Yeah. It's a long engagement.
Why did they decide to do this? Did they say?
I don't know. From what I gather, they had made this decision. But when they went to P-Town last fall, it wasn't with the idea of doing it there. They were simply going on a trip. It was there, though, that they decided to do it there.
Okay. So that they were going to come back and do it.
Yeah.
There. Okay.
And it was held at, you've heard of Norman Mailer, the author.
Yeah.
It was held at their home.
Yeah. There was just a thing in the New York Times about evidently the caption was, "Have you read my book? Now visit my house," or something like that.
Okay.
So it looked like a very very nice little place.
Oh, yeah. You know, it had a nice deck, big deck, towards the ocean, and then you had the beach.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead with the extra question.
Okay.
It's recording
You're
already.
rolling? Okay. Tell us about the year that the run got flooded out. Where was that?
Okay, we went to Whitewater State Park one year and had a run down there. And it rained and rained and rained. I remember that afternoon we actually went to some caverns where you had to actually crawl through the caverns, and the water was just coming down inside the cavern. That should have been a clue to what was coming. Well, we had the banquet Saturday night, and we went to bed. Some of us went to bed. I did. And the next thing I remember, somebody's banging on the door. The ranger's here. There's a flood coming. We have to get out of here. So everybody had to get out. And there was no way to drive out. The bridge over to from the parking lot to where we were was flooded. And we were in a very steep valley with palisades on each side. So we all had to get together, and the ranger led us over the palisades. Now, it was pouring rain. There was no path. You grabbed bushes to try to keep your footing, which was sliding down because it was all turning into mud. Well, ultimately, we did get to the top, and we had to stay up there until he gave us the all clear that the flood had come and gone. Then we went down, and when we got there, we could see how high the water had gotten up to where the cabins were, right to where the door was. The cabins were above the ground, but the water just got to that level. And the caterer for Sunday brunch couldn't make it because it was raining where he was too. So basically, we just had to tell everybody, go home. You know, there was no parting ceremony, nothing. Everybody just left. Well, we had spent the money on the brunch, and we had about $5 on everybody's run fee. So we decided to make a commemorative pin, and it's called I Survive. Go for 6, I think it was. And it has sort of a wave motif on it. And I know the people who came to the very next run, most of those people came back.
Okay.
Yeah.
And talk about finding the current run site in New Ulm where the run is held now.
Okay, the current run site is in New Ulm. It's Flandreau State Park. It was first looked at by the Knights of Leather. No, I'm sorry. The Knights, the Leather Knights. But they didn't like it because they felt it was too open. But they told us about it. And they told us about it at our installation banquet, which was in January. And the next day, another member and I went down there. You know, it's January. And there's at least a foot of snow on the ground. And to get into the grounds, you have to go down this steep road. Well, the road was completely closed. The ranger who showed us the property parked at the top. We had to walk through unplowed 1 foot, not 1 foot, I'm sorry, 1 yard depth of snow to the bottom. And then he would say, over here is the pond. Well, all you saw was this big white field. Then we went over to the cabins, and he took us into those, and we sort of had to guess what all this would look like. So that's how we found the current site.
Okay. Where was the pond? Because there's no pond there now that I know.
At the foot of the road that goes down, it was right there.
Oh.
Very large. I used to love it. I'm an early morning person, and I was as I say, I was usually the run committee chairman those early years, and so I'd get up, put the coffee on, and I'd go into the pond. You know, I just loved it. And we all went skinny dipping, you know, because we had the place to ourselves. And it was deep. I mean, you know, there were parts of it that, you know, you could hardly. I'm 6 feet tall, and I could just barely touch the bottom.
So what happened to it?
Well, I think it was mostly money. You know, they didn't have the funds to. It was artesian fed, and I guess it got more and more filled with various foliage, and you know. So it's a shame because it really. Also, they had put in I guess a swimming pool in another part of the pond, the park. So I guess from their viewpoint, you know, you could go over there, you know. Well, it wasn't the same thing for us.